I don't know who that is, but no, we have not started yet.
Nice to see a smile.
Who is that? Cam?
Sound check, yep.
You are on time, council member.
Yay.
This is Schrader. I'm here too, Council Vice President.
Awesome. We haven't done roll call yet, so everybody is on time.
The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Jenkins, and I am the chair of the Policy, Government Oversight Committee. And I am going to call to order our regular committee meeting for Wednesday, December 2nd. I'd like to note for the record, this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Rake.
Here.
Gordon.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Cunningham.
Present.
Osmond.
Here.
Goodman.
Present.
Kano.
Here.
Bender.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmisano.
Present.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Present.
Chair Jenkins.
Here.
There are 13 members present.
Thank you, clerk, and let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. Colleagues, we have 15 items on today's agenda, including 4 discussion items, one of which is part of our finance subcommittee. And so we'll start with the consent agenda, which is items 1 through 11. Items number 1 and 2 are legal settlements, the details of which are listed on the agenda. Item number 3 authorizes the submission of comments as a formal party to the Xcel Energy Integrated Resource Plan. Item number 4 authorizes requests for proposals for 2 new 100% renewable electricity resources. Item number 5 approves the Community Environmental Advisory Commission, or SEAC, appointments. Item number 6 authorizes an amendment to the City of Minneapolis MinFlex plan. Item number 7 is a resolution accepting third quarter 2020 donations. Items numbers 8 through 11 are various contract amendments related to the public service building project, details of which are listed on the agenda. Would any of my colleagues like to pull any of these items from today's consent agenda? Seeing none, I will move for approval of the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher. Fletcher. Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye. Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and the consent agenda is approved. Item number 12 is an update from the Finance Subcommittee, and I will now invite the chair of that subcommittee, Councilmember Fletcher, to lead this portion of our meeting. Councilmember Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair Jenkins. Item number 12 on our agenda is a report on the grant from the Minneapolis Downtown Improvement District to fund downtown strategic justice partnerships. Mary Ellen Heng from the City Attorney's Office will be presenting this report, and I'll invite Ms. Heng to give that presentation.
Hi. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, Chair Jenkins. So yes, I don't have a lot to add, but I wanted to update you on some new things of what we're going to be doing with this program with the continuation of the grant. And I think you all know, but we switched the name of our program from the Downtown 100 to the Strategic Justice Partnership. We felt that was more representative of what we're trying to do with our justice partners and with the program. The grant funds one full-time probation officer and a prosecutor used on these cases. And the new component that we're adding in 2021 is, in addition to the contract that funds our probation officer and the attorney in my office, they are contracting with Hennepin County to add a full-time social worker to our group, to our partnership. And they're also adding a van, which is going to be used for transport. So those are two great additions. The contract is still being worked out with Hennepin County and the details, but what we hope will happen is that this will allow us to move this program forward in the system. And I talk about this a lot when I talk about the work we're doing, that everything we've done so far is really once someone comes into the criminal justice system on a charge. And our goal is always to take these projects that we're doing and these programs that work and move them forward. And this is one example of that. When law enforcement responds to something, one of these low-level misdemeanors in this downtown improvement district, loitering case, drug paraphernalia, trespass, something like that, they're going to be talking to the individual and give them the option to see if they are eligible for services and if they're interested in having help getting connected with those services. And those services can be anything from housing, employment, mental health, addiction, medical care, things like that. If the individual is interested in that, they're going to be put in contact right away with the social worker. And then they will be able to take that individual in the van down to the new triage center on 1800 Chicago. And that's where they will hopefully get hooked into services. And this can happen both without someone being charged, or it can also be used, again, in the court system. We'll tie this into the work we're doing in restorative court. So the social worker is going to play a key role in talking to the person, assessing what their needs are, making some basic determination if they are eligible for the services, and then hopefully encouraging them to accept. I'm excited about that. I'm also really, really excited about the use of the van. What we have seen in a lot of our work is our law enforcement partners are very willing to transport someone to the triage center. But as you can imagine, not a lot of people have a lot of trust and faith and want to hop in the squad car thinking that's where they're going. So having this option that's not tied to law enforcement for transport, we're hopeful that it's going to really increase the number of people that will want to go down to the triage center and meet with people and see how they can be helped. So that addition, we're really looking forward to adding that to this program. And then anyone who does happen to get charged but is working with a social worker would be eligible to participate in restorative court. And that will allow them to have a better disposition on their case. And we've seen the reduction of recidivism restorative court has done. And I think it also will have a link. We're working with the Sheriff's Department. In 2021, we'll be posting for another social worker who's going to be at the jail during evening hours to triage people who are booked into the jail on these type of offenses and hopefully do an expedited release process to 1800, and rather than have them go through the formal 4-hour booking process and possibly be held on bail. So I think it ties together really well with all of the work that we're currently doing. It is just a nice addition to the program that we've had in place for 10 years. So that's kind of the quick update. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Hang. And I do see Council President Bender in queue. Go ahead, Council President.
Thank you, Ms. Hang, for all your work on this. I just wondered if you could talk more about the target population and how this serves the juvenile population that we've all been talking about so much at the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee and in many conversations with Mr. Freeman's office and the corrections folks. Yeah, so how much is this program interacting with juveniles and how does it interact with other things that are set up to serve and respond to juveniles?
Certainly. Council President Bender, members of the committee, one of the partners of one of our partners in this program is YouthLink, and while my office doesn't have any prosecution authority over those cases, a lot of the individuals that are coming into contact are juveniles, and this will just be another resource for those juveniles. Like, we send them to YouthLink and use them. And so, yes, I think as they come across juveniles that are downtown that are in need of services, I believe that the social worker will be able to work with them and hopefully get them the services they need, just like they would anyone over 18.
Thank you. And just quickly, we had 2 presentations and discussions at the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee at our last meeting, which includes city, county, and suburban law enforcement, corrections, social service providers. One was about the restorative court and some of the outcomes, which I think would be worth bringing to POGO at a future date next year. And then we also had some outcomes from a working group of that larger group that is particularly focused on recidivism issues with youth. It started with car theft. Now those crimes have escalated into carjackings, and there are very specific recommendations that have come out of that work group for next steps about how to address the gaps in the system that are specific to juveniles. So again, just want to flag that for my colleagues that there's like a lot of conversations happening about, kind of these patterns overall and recidivism overall and improvements to our justice system, but particularly about juveniles as we see such an increase in juvenile crimes. So thanks for all the work.
Thank you. Next is Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the report and the update. And I was recalling when we first did the Downtown 100 concept, we justified it by looking at the expenses that were involved by not doing anything. And I'm just wondering if we still might be able to be tracking that and building the case for how much we've been saving in terms of court resources and police resources with the current program. I'm not sure if you have any of that information now, but kind of getting that in the future would be helpful.
Councilmember Gordon, members of the committee, yes, when we calculate that, we can't give an exact dollar amount because it is one of those kind of amorphous numbers. But yes, we will be. Carrie Kovaleski is the attorney in my office that's now heading up this program, and at the end of 2020, she will be looking at all of our data and doing our reports on all of that. And part of that is we look at long-term and short-term recidivism, and we can extrapolate from that cost savings to my office for not having to prosecute the court system and all that. So we should have that available hopefully fairly soon in early 2021. The numbers will be a little off because obviously the court system has been slowed down with everything that's happened since March, and a lot of these offenses, the low-level misdemeanors that usually these individuals are committing were not prioritized cases when the court was shut down, especially in March and April. So we'll have to see what those numbers look like. But yes, anytime any of our programs reduce recidivism, short-term and long-term, I think we can extrapolate that's savings for everyone. And so we hope to have those numbers sometime in the first quarter.
And I'm also a little bit curious about the geography. So this is still just downtown and the downtown core. It's not even the whole first precinct?
Correct. It's still in that area. The restorative court is citywide, so it's anyone from anywhere, and we are expanding restorative court to a second half day because it has been so well received and so successful. We will now be doing that calendar on Wednesday afternoon and I believe Tuesday morning starting in 2021. So we're really excited about that. That is a citywide program, so we're kind of using the model that started with this back in 2010, expanding it to social workers rather than probation officers, because while the probation officer still plays a key role in the strategic justice partnership, for some of these individuals, they are very high need but low risk, and even a dedicated probation officer is not the way to go. Adding the social worker and allowing them to go through that track actually is producing better results that way. And so we'll have the probation officer for those, high need, high risk clients, but I think this will be a nice addition to that toolbox.
Well, I'm intrigued with the concept of trying to pilot it outside of downtown sometime, and maybe we have to think really carefully about where that might be, but Cedar Riverside or somewhere, there might be another place where it would make a lot of sense. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Council Vice President Jenkins also has a question or comment.
Thank you, Chair Fletcher and Ms. Hang. Really appreciate this update. I was just curious, due to the proximity of the Restorative Justice Center to Ovivo, is there any connections if people present with chemical health issues or chemical dependency issues? Do you know if that is a connection or a part of the network of resources that people are being referred to?
Council Vice President Jenkins, members of the committee, yes, I don't know about that particular program. I know they send people to a variety of treatment programs. I assume that is one that's used, but yes, part of this process will be if someone is presenting with any form of alcohol or drug addiction, they will be, they can be given that assessment and be given a referral to whatever treatment is appropriate for their needs, whether that's inpatient, outpatient, trying to find the right treatment center based on, maybe cultural needs, things like that. So yes, that will be a big part of what this work will do.
Okay. Yeah, no, I do really appreciate this approach as well. When I worked at Hennepin County, we employed a lot of probation officers and social workers to help deal with restorative justice. There were many more community-based restorative justice sites at the time, but I think that the probation officer approach is a good way to, there's still some teeth in that, but it's not an officer with a gun, so to speak. So appreciate this approach and would absolutely like to see it expanded beyond downtown, to Councilmember Gordon's point. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. If I could just add one more thing to your comments, I think what makes this approach really unique is for probation officers to engage, there has to be a sentence imposed and they have to be court ordered on probation. And using social workers, we don't even need them to be in the system. If they're eligible for services, they can work with a social worker without ever being charged. And even when they are charged, we have set this up to be a purely voluntary relationship. And I think that has really been the key to the success in restorative court and what we hope to see the success in this program, because individuals are choosing for themselves to accept the services that they need, and they're not court ordered. They understand if they change their mind or they don't follow through, there's no, there's no jail time or anything associated. Their case just simply goes through normal channels and we resolve it. And what we're finding is when individuals are ready and presented with options for the right services, they're choosing to do that, and they're having more success because I think they're choosing to make those changes, and it's work. And the social workers just have a different relationship because they're not court ordered. They're not seen as an arm of my office or the courts. So I think that is something we didn't necessarily anticipate when we started working with all the social workers, but we've seen the value in that doing something outside of a court order is having really positive effects. And there certainly is a place for the court to order someone on probation and see if we can get them in the right direction if they need that extra boost. But this is a nice first step before we get to that level.
Excellent point. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in queue. I'll just add my gratitude for this. I think it's evident to a lot of people who spend time downtown that the opportunity to have additional social supports that people can voluntarily engage with and get help that they need is something that is just evidently a need. Intuitively, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it layers well with some of the other proposed programming that the city's pursuing and that the county's pursuing at a lot of different levels. So I'm appreciative of the work and of the partnership, and I'll move approval of this, of the acceptance of this grant. Is there any further discussion? Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that there's a real opportunity going forward to also learn from the kinds of investments that are being made in downtown, where there is a high concentration of issues, and what could be expanded and learned to reach other parts of the city as well.
Agreed. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and that motion is approved. This committee's recommendation will be forwarded to Friday's council meeting for final action. With that, I'll turn the chair back to you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, and thank you again to Ms. Hang. Item number 13 on our discussion agenda is a report on funding and legislative strategies to support tenants facing eviction. Dean Porter Nelson from the Community Planning and Economic Development Department will be presenting this report. Mr. Porter Nelson, are you available?
Hi, yes, I am available. I'd like Katie Topinka had actually planned to join in this presentation as well. Katie, are you available?
Yes, thank you, Dean and Council Vice President. I'm just going to kick the presentation off very briefly and then turn it over to Dean to go into more detail. So this report
Wonderful.
is—
Welcome.
Thank you. So this report is in response to a staff direction that the council adopted over the summer, directing staff from CPED, the City Attorney's Office, and the Finance Department to pursue strategies to support tenants facing eviction, with a focus on funding and resource strategies to provide right to counsel, and also legislative strategies that we could consider. So Dean is going to go into much more detail on our analysis and report on right to counsel specifically. But before we got into that, we just wanted to set the context a little bit in terms of our overall housing strategies that the city has been pursuing over the last couple of years. So next slide, please. So these 7 housing strategies are have been presented previously and are available in a report we released earlier this year, the Way Home report. And these are housing strategies that are aligned with the implementing the Minneapolis 2040 plan. And so we just wanted to set the context of where strategies to prevent eviction fit in here. So the 7 strategies are increasing housing supply, producing more affordable rental housing, and preserving affordable rental housing, preserving naturally occurring affordable housing, improving and sustaining access to homeownership, especially among low-income and Black, Indigenous, people of color residents, supporting renters, preventing and ending homelessness, and then maximizing potential of publicly owned land to meet city housing goals. So as you can imagine, strategies to support tenants facing eviction really fits in with our fifth strategy here on supporting renters. In addition to fitting in with these housing strategies, it also fits in directly with the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan, which this committee regularly receives reports on. And the housing goal in that plan is reducing involuntary displacement and rental housing for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrant communities. So looking at strategies to prevent eviction among renters is well aligned with the SREAP housing goal. So next slide, please. This is just a bit more detail on the activities we have been undertaking as a city over the last couple of years to support renters. So under programs, we've had the emergency stabilization and housing stabilization pilot programs. We have, the council has adopted a number of policies. I already referenced the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan, the Renter First policy, several new ordinances around supporting renters, including advance notice of sale and post-sale tenant protections, the renter protection ordinance adopted last year, and other things that are under development. And in addition to the policies, we have renter services. And so part of that is what we're going to go into more detail here, and that's the partnerships we have with organizations like Legal Aid and Homeline, who provide legal assistance and legal support to renters. One of those things is for eviction representation, which is the focus of this presentation. We also work with Legal Aid so that they can provide representation in habitability cases to help people where there are repairs needed in their rental housing. And of course, Homeline provides free legal assistance to renters in Minneapolis. So just wanted to give that overview before diving into the staff direction to just set that context for you. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dean to get into more details about right to counsel.
Thanks, Katie. Next slide, please. So to start out, I just wanted to give an overview of how we have set up this report to respond to the staff direction. So first, we'll provide a national overview of other cities and states that have implemented right to counsel policies or have described them or have proposed them. We'll look at current city funding for tenant legal services, examine some proposals that were provided to staff by Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, look at a menu of policy options, and finally, take a look at how the city's state level legislative agenda relates to this topic. Next slide. So first off, we look at some peer cities and what they're doing in this area. So the first are New York and San Francisco. Both of these cities have right to counsel programs. In general, when we look at other cities, right to counsel programs tend to guarantee a right to legal representation in eviction proceedings to tenants that are below a certain income level, and then the cost of representation is paid for through a city program. And most programs out there provide a mix of representation, of full representation to some tenants and then limited representation to others. And some approaches are phased, like New York's, where they're starting out with a relatively low number of tenants that are receiving representation and trying to increase that and eventually get to full representation for all tenants. Other programs most programs have figures that they cite related to public sector savings, such as reduced homeless shelter costs, reduced foster care costs, or medical bills. And so we did see that throughout as well. And so here we just have some numbers from New York and San Francisco in terms of the costs that they're spending on these programs, which can vary quite widely, obviously based on population, but also based on the amount that's allocated per case and the level of representation provided. Okay, next slide. So 3 other cities that have a right to counsel strategy are Cleveland, Philadelphia, and Newark. I just wanted to highlight with these programs that they're very new, all having been implemented in 2019 or 2020. So we don't have as much data as we did on New York, which started their program in 2017 and has already been able to show that they're representing quite a few tenants, and that the number of tenants represented in New York, for example, rose from 1% to 32% between 2013 and 2019. So it showed that that program had a difference in making sure that tenants had representation in eviction cases. Next slide. Really briefly, just wanted to highlight that a couple of states, Massachusetts and Connecticut, have some legislation that's been proposed around right to counsel. So it isn't necessarily just a local level strategy, but to date, the only jurisdictions that have implemented such a strategy are cities that we were able to uncover in our research anyway. Next slide. So now we're turning over to look at current city funding levels around a right to counsel strategy and what the city is already doing in this area. So first off, the city implemented a contract with Homeline in 2015 initially, and has since increased that contract to its current level of $125,000 annually. This contract with Homeline is to provide legal advice to tenants through a hotline, and then referrals to actually get full legal representation. So it does not provide representation, but it does provide a very valuable service to over 3,700 tenants annually who are receiving advice about their specific legal situation. And in many cases, they're receiving some advice that might help them to face a possible eviction proceeding. And in some cases, they're receiving a referral to a group like Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. Next slide. Current city funding for Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid has increased greatly since the first year that the city started supporting legal aid in tenant landlord cases. So that was 2018 with a habitability repair contract, which was focused on providing representation to tenants who were trying to compel their landlord to make necessary repairs to units to just provide that basic level of habitability. In 2019, an eviction defense contract was added by the city council, and the habitability contract was increased. So there was about a funding level of around $500,000 for both of those contracts in 2019. And now in 2020, we've seen something a little bit different because the city has some CDBG COVID response dollars, and those have been allocated to replace the contracts that existed in 2019. And in addition to that, they are including some additional services such as the Tenant Resource Center and preparing for a potential surge response if the eviction moratorium does expire in the future. That preparation is taking place right now. And so currently the contract that is in place is a year and a half. It goes from October of this year through March of 2022. And so that is about $800,000 annually. It does include additional services, so it doesn't necessarily increase the number of eviction cases that will be seen. That's at around 320 annually, which is about around 10% of the total need for eviction representation for low and moderate income tenants. Next slide. Pro bono counsel efforts are part of the city's overall strategy in this area. The More Representation Minneapolis initiative is a partnership between the mayor's office and the private bar and the Volunteer Lawyers Network. And so that network does also provide representation to tenants. Volunteer Lawyers Network, some of their coordination costs, their efforts to coordinate that work are subcontracted through Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid and the city's contract with them. So we are supporting those efforts as well. Next slide. So as we look at where the city's at right now in terms of legal representation for tenants facing eviction, Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid provided a couple of proposals to city staff that looked at the amount of funding that would allow them to provide essentially a right to counsel for tenants facing eviction. So first, we have at $1.5 million a year, legal aid anticipates that they could provide services to all tenants that are in need of eviction representation, around 3,000 tenants per year. However, some of those tenants, only 40% would receive full representation, whereas a more limited level of representation would be provided to other tenants to try to meet that full need with $1.5 million a year. And a more, I guess, robust effort, even beyond that robust level of support for right to counsel, legal aid provided a proposal saying that for $3.75 million annually, all tenants that needed legal representation and were low or moderate income would be able to receive full representation. So these figures take into account about $800 per client in the first scenario and about $1,250 per client in the second scenario. And if you compare those to some other cities, they're actually relatively reasonable cost levels. Some of the other cities like New York and San Francisco had higher representation amounts per client, but it is still significantly more than the city is budgeting for this area currently. Next slide. So as this committee and the city council looks at policy options going forward, staff in CPED, the city attorney's office, the finance department, regulatory services, and the city attorney all convened and looked at how the city could potentially look at a right to counsel policy. So we came up with the possibility of either a resolution or an ordinance that would authorize right to counsel for tenants facing eviction in Minneapolis. Either mechanism would have the effect of policy and would demonstrate city commitment to right to counsel. Another option, a third option, I guess, would be an amendment to the renter first policy, and that would provide a right to counsel for tenants facing eviction in Minneapolis as well, being embedded in an existing policy. And so these are really three different options to consider for the city council. And if the city decided to go with either with an ordinance or a resolution that would be similar to how some other cities have done it, other cities have also embedded a right to counsel within other ordinances, similar to how the city might look at amending the renter first policy. So there's a precedent for all those different options. And then finally, just wanted to highlight one exception to that is that in San Francisco, there was actually a ballot initiative regarding right to counsel. So next slide. The budget implications of a right to counsel policy would be ongoing. And so eviction representation services, as well as the tenant hotline, those are existing city budget items. However, the city's current Homeline contracts, those are an annual budget item, but the legal aid contract runs through only March of 2022. And so if the council decided to move forward with the right to counsel strategy next year in 2021, a new funding source starting in 2022 would be needed to continue to ramp up towards a goal of right to counsel. And so the funding could be ramped up on an annual basis. And of course, the level of tenant representation would be ramped up accordingly. And of course, the annual budget would always serve as an opportunity to reassess funding levels. And so there are definitely some budget implications that would take place if the city council did decide to move forward with one of the options outlined on the previous slide. Next slide.
Thank you. This one, I will cover the slide here about the legislative agenda. So in addition to the right to counsel evaluation that we did as part of the staff direction, we also looked at additional legislative strategies. And so as part of that, staff have recommended, and I know the next item on your agenda here today is the 2021 legislative agenda. So we have recommended as part of that, well, first, let me back up first. What's currently in the city's legislative agenda are sort of general statements on eviction prevention, which are here on this slide. So the city has already stated that it supports funding and policy to help reduce evictions and supports strategies to reduce the impact of eviction filings on future housing opportunities. So we have recommended adding to the 2021 legislative agenda that to be more explicit, that we support policy policies, including just cause eviction and an eviction pre-filing notice, which would be increasing the timeline that from which somebody receives an eviction notice for how much time they have before the eviction is actually filed. And so those are two strategies we also looked at as part of the staff direction and that we are recommending adding to the 2021 state legislative agenda. Next slide. So I think that's all we have. So we're both available for questions.
Thank you both for this presentation. And it looks like we have a question or comment from Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff for all the work on this, and something that Councilmember Ellison and I have been working on since 2008 is both moving us in the direction of considering a right to counsel commitment from the city of Minneapolis. Now that it's been a couple years, we have a lot more examples from cities around the country that have gone first. And and thinking about how it relates to the renter first policy that the council adopted. And I know there's a ton of interest from council members around the city in supporting renters. We began this work before the pandemic, and so I think things have changed so much because we're lucky to be in a state that has a statewide eviction moratorium. I think we all know that once a moratorium is lifted, we will have a real potentially bad situation on our hands of folks facing eviction en masse. So I just am really glad that we're being so proactive, and I know our staff are constantly talking with folks at the state and the county. It just makes this work all the more important. Having hundreds of meetings over the years I've been in office about renter support, I've become convinced that having legal representation in court when a tenant is facing eviction is one of the most cost-effective and strategic ways that a community can support housing stability. We know there are people living in tents because they've been evicted from their homes. We know that with what's a real moderate investment compared to some of our other housing strategies, we're able to reach thousands of people. And based on experiences from other cities, I think the outcomes are really good. So, and I think it really ties in with this whole other strategy, which is going after problem landlords and the revolving fund that we created last year in the budget, partnering with, because as our partners at Legal Aid or at Volunteer Lawyers Network and others, start to see the patterns coming through court, it's just like one of the other ways that we start to get at identifying, is there a place for tenant remedy action or other kind of more holistic, more legal approaches that we can take, because we know there's such a tie between quality of housing maintenance issues and potential for eviction. So, we've just ramped up so much in the last couple of years, all of the tools that we have for supporting tenants. I think this is one missing piece. I do intend to bring something to propose for consideration next year in partnership with staff and with our recommendations. So if you have thoughts about this, or you want to, Councilor Ellison and I have been working on this. If there are others who want to, again, with like so many other council members, contributing and participating, if folks are interested in this one, just reach out anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And I'm just curious, have you and Councilmember Ellison been working on this since 2008 or 2018?
18.
Okay, all righty.
That's when we first did our the budget commitments to fund tenant protection in the courts as a pilot. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was the answer, but you mentioned 2008 in your earlier comments. So, Councilmember
I think maybe I just mumbled. I guess I just wanted to highlight the continuity. I was just like create a little more context for this and the continuity with the stuff that the council has been working on so actively, and certainly not just me and Councilmember Ellison, like the entire council around housing stability and renter protection, and just how this one piece fits in. So thanks for the opportunity to comment on that.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely support all of your comments and thoughts around that, and commend and thank you both for the efforts that you've been leading on this issue. Councilmember Osmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the report, and I'm so glad the city is taking a lead to protect the residents coming from a ward that is over 90% renters. I have seen, we have seen landlords, property managers really step in on the rights of people, and eviction rates going up because this president don't have the legal representation, or they don't have the resource of protection. And there's so many barriers, especially in my ward with language and different barriers. So I'm so glad this is a work that we are looking into it. We all know that eviction leads to homelessness, and the issue we have in Minneapolis is homelessness. And to prevent that and to put work and money and really energy to protect the most vulnerable population we have, which is majority of them are low income that don't have the legal representation. It's very important. So thank you all.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I just want to thank Ms. Topeka and Mr. Porter Nelson for that presentation. And absolutely, this is one cost-effective strategy to help housing stability. I will now ask the clerk to file that report. And thank you both again. So item number 14 on our agenda is a report on the 2021 legislative agenda, which was referenced in the previous presentation, and agenda and policy positions. The Intergovernmental Relations Department Director, Ms. Fatima Moore, will be presenting this report, and I will invite Ms. Moore to give that presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair Jenkins and members of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee. Name is Fatima Moore with the Intergovernmental Relations Department, and we'll be presenting the draft recommendations for the 2021 legislative agenda and policy positions today. Presenting with me is my colleague Alison Nessie from IGR as well. We'll walk through the process that we've taken thus far to get the positions that will be recommended before we go into those presentations. If I can go to the next slide, please. And next one. Thank you. Awesome. So each year, changes are made to the city's legislative agenda. And those changes include things like new policy positions, technical fixes to current policies, as well as updating languages that are on the agenda. These changes are proposed by department staff, members of the City Council, and the way that process has worked so far is a team of department staff convene at the end of the regular session to discuss legislative ideas or barriers that have been identified, statutes that preempt the city from achieving many of its goals. The team is called the Policy Liaison Team, and this team has an application process that it utilizes to vet these ideas, has robust conversations about policy proposals that are brought forward, including a question that really gets to what is the race equity impact of any idea that is brought forward to the Policy Liaison Team. Of the proposals that we heard over a duration of four meetings, 21 of those proposals are what will be recommended today. Based on the actions of the POGA committee today and the council on Friday, if those recommendations are adopted, they will be put onto a draft 21 legislative agenda. And then that agenda will be presented in the next council cycle meeting with track changes to show either the deletion of old policy positions because we've achieved those particular goals. And we would also track the new additions to the legislative agenda. Overall, many of the policies and the positions are expressed at a really high level, and that is to ensure that the city can be as agile as possible in response to the fast-paced and fluid nature of the legislative environment. So oftentimes we are not very specific. We tend to be pretty vague in our policy positions. I'll ask the clerk to go to the next slide, please. And what will be presented on the next 3 slides are items that we recommend putting forth on our agenda. So we've got our positions, which are a running list of policy positions, and then we have the specific items that we know what we would recommend leading on as we move into the 2021 session. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Allison Nessie to go over these agenda items.
Thank you, Fatima. Good afternoon, Chair Jenkins, committee members, Allison Nessie with the Intergovernmental Relations team. As Fatima just mentioned, we, our agenda on policy positions is a very large document, but the first 2 pages of that are our annual agenda. So these are some recommendations that we're bringing forward to highlight and include in the 2021 agenda specifically. So the first of those are economic rebuilding and recovery. As we've updated the council over the summer, we have been working with the Minneapolis legislative delegation as well as other legislative leaders around identifying and trying to get resources for businesses, properties, households, and overall community efforts that were impacted by the events of civil unrest after the killing of George Floyd. So we recommend adding that language to the 2021 agenda specifically. As Fatima noted, we don't usually identify specific bills or items. This gives us the latitude to respond in the moment as ideas are presented. Our second recommendation is around violence prevention. Our previous agendas have included language for public safety and criminal justice reform, but we want to make sure, while highlighting those as well, we want to add violence prevention as one of the key priorities for the city as we reimagine public safety. So the language would be to seek state funding for programs in the Office of Violence Prevention that disrupts the cycle of violence through evidence-based programming. Next slide, please. Our third suggestion for the 2021 agenda is arbitration reform. The public safety reform package that passed through the legislature in June during I believe it was the first special session, was comprehensive. And again, with a bipartisan legislature, there were some compromises. We are still seeking a bit more more ability to reform the arbitration system. So the specific language would be to remove the undue barrier for a chief law enforcement officer to make disciplinary decisions, especially in use of force instances, and to clarify the types of decisions that can be overturned by the arbiter or a review body. Again, this would take legislative action. Our fourth suggestion is the eviction prevention moratorium during COVID-19 pandemic. The language being amending the position to reflect ending evictions during the coronavirus pandemic, appropriating funds and enhancing the infrastructure to keep residents in their homes. And as Katie spoke to in the last discussion item, we are also proposing to amend the just cause and pre-filing eviction policies to reflect the 7-day pre-filing notice under the governor's executive order and feasibility of the 14-day pre-filing notice, which we are pushing for regardless of a pandemic or executive order being in place. Next slide, please. The fifth proposal for the 2021 agenda would be to around the terms of affordability in publicly financed affordable housing projects. We are seeking to allow local units of governments to set affordability periods beyond 30 years for projects that receive public funds. There's a barrier right now with Minnesota Housing Finance Agency and their ability to set affordability rates. So we would need that to extend beyond 30 years would need to be a legislative fix. Our sixth proposal for the 21 agenda specifically is state support for unsheltered homelessness. To seek enhanced collaboration, funding, and strategic coordinated leadership from the state to effectively respond to the increase in unsheltered homelessness in both Minneapolis and statewide. So that concludes items specifically for the 2021 agenda. Fatima will move to the next slide that is, we'll go through the policy positions that were proposed, but if there are any questions now, happy to stand.
I think there's a question from Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is the right time to ask, but happy to wait if it makes more sense. I was reading the full legislative agenda and hearing the change items, the new proposed. I was reflecting that there isn't a lot of change proposed in the what would be considered police reform or oversight or accountability category. And I just wondered if you could talk more about, you know, kind of our approach to that, knowing all that's going on. I mean, we're hearing very clear demands for police reform and accountability. We've heard lots of suggestions for things that appear to require state law change. So is there a need to take a deeper dive in looking at our public safety related items as they pertain to police reform? And I know you're a small staff and you know that you work in coordination with subject matter experts, and that this is really an enterprise related request, not one to the two of you specifically, but I know, I mean, I've talked to you both about this, and I know you and I have probably, I mean, maybe other council members too, have had conversations with our legislative delegation, just knowing that they're also working on and leading some new change items, especially since George Floyd's death and so much outcry for things related to reform. So it feels a little inappropriate, I'll just say, to not have really taken a deep dive and change our reform-oriented agenda, given so much of what we're hearing about reform and accountability. But what do you need from us to be able to do that, and how can we support our IGR team in gathering? I mean, I know the mayor has convened tables. Like, is that captured in our legislative agenda? You know, what conversations need to happen so that we can get to a more robust legislative agenda related to police reform and accountability?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Council President Bender. I am going to defer to Fatima, who is not only our director, but covers public safety.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Council President, for that question. Council members, yes, you're absolutely right. There are multiple tables having many conversations around public safety reform and exactly what that looks like. There are also conversations that involve members of our delegation, and luckily we have a delegation who did lead a lot of the Police Accountability Act measures that were passed in the first special session. And we are continuing to not only have conversations with them as they prepare for the 2021 session around public safety reform, but also track the multiple conversations that are happening in tables at the same time, so that when there are clear identified legislative strategies and statutes that need to be amended, that we will come back to the council and request an amendment to add some of those legislative strategies to our 2021 leg agenda. In addition to that, because we want to identify that public safety is a key priority for the council and the city, we are also going to be separating all of our public safety reform policy positions and agenda item and put them in a standalone public safety agenda so that we can easily identify key legislative changes that are currently on our agenda, but then also highlight those new and upcoming amendments that could be included.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate that part of the reason to highlight this is I just want to make sure that you and your team have the support that you need to complete that important task, and knowing that we often rely on subject matter staff in departments. I'm not sure there's a clear connection. I guess civil rights might be kind of the place that would originate, but I'm not sure we're really well set up as an enterprise to take that on in a staff-driven way. So I just want to flag, for you and for my colleagues, that this is likely an area where we will need to provide some leadership, some clear direction to staff, some support, so that we can make sure that we have what we need as a city to get this to the right place, to where we can advance the ideas that our constituents are asking for. So thanks for all your work.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President. And I would like to thank council members who we have been engaged in conversations on about public safety reform already. And so those include some of those tables, quote unquote, that I did note, including you, Council President, Council Member Fletcher, Chair Johnson, as well of the IGR committee. So we'll continue participating in those conversations, and then also making note of what community organizations and advocacy groups who are centering public safety are also bringing forth to the legislature.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for this information thus far. I'm excited to see the changes that are included, and I'm also happy to hear about the flexibility that is being built into what's being presented and what we're moving forward with, because as we move forward with the transforming community safety work with community engagement, we will inevitably see things rise to the surface that require state statute changes. And so I really appreciate that flexibility and awareness going into it. This is something we've talked about before, so thank you for that. And I also just want to take a moment to highlight the violence prevention edition. I think that's really critical. One of the things that I've been frustrated with as an elected official, local elected official, is that it really is almost entirely on local government to forward violence prevention. That is evidence-based. There's a lot of evaluations and scientific research behind it. And, the fact that we've had such a hard time being able to claw in outside dollars to be able to help forward this work, I think really speaks to the need of increased awareness at all levels of government, of all levels of government's responsibility to be thinking about public safety from a more comprehensive approach that's data-driven, evidence-based. And so I'm very excited to see this. I really, in the state of Minnesota, Minneapolis has really been at the forefront of implementing and evaluating violence prevention strategies within our local context. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that we add this to our legislative agenda and continue to raise this up as a priority as we're thinking about how are we building a safer city, not only in Minneapolis, but across the state. So just wanted to say thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And as always, I'm on standby for however I can be of support in making that happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
All right, Ms. Moore, I don't see any other comments in queue. You can continue with your presentation.
Thank you, Council Vice President. So the next slide, and it's already up there. So these now are what we're recommending for a policy position. So back to what Allison said, we got the first 2 pages that really represent our legislative agenda. These ones are policy positions added into other sections of our proposed 2021 agenda. And the first one has to do with state funding for public health emergencies. The COVID-19 pandemic has definitely highlighted the important role that local public health has in responding in real time to the health crisis. And additionally, we really want to make sure that we are getting adequate funding from the state level to support this really important work. Additionally, as we look at race equity and public health, We know that if we are able to get clearly disaggregated data, it can further inform the kind of responses, the equity-based targeted responses to move the local public health work forward in a more equitable way. And so I want to make sure that the delivery systems that the city is developing and putting out into the public truly represents what needs to be done via clear data. And so that's what this is intending to do. The next one is regarding race-based equity testing. And it really has to do with in a 1984 legislation that was passed called the Local Government Pay Equity Act. And this Pay Equity Act was essentially developed to eliminate sex-based wage disparities in public employment. The act requires that local government submit reports of its pay structure. The idea around the race-based equity test is to expand the requirement to include a pay equity framework in addition, so a pay equity methodology in addition to help get at some of the pay equity gap that we see in the state of Minnesota. Go on to the next slide, please. The next proposal is around vehicle registration. Currently, if a vehicle does not have a current registration, the interpretation of the Minnesota law requires traffic control to identify the driver of a vehicle before ticketing. And in working typically with parked cars, we've seen that we are essentially prohibited from ticketing if we don't know who the driver is. And so this proposal seeks to have you identify, have the registrant of the vehicle be that identifying factor and not the driver of the vehicle before you can ticket them. And so this is one issue that really has to do with parked cars and that are unregistered. The next proposal is regarding the two generational children's savings account. The Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board has been working with Hennepin County to launch a targeted two generational children's savings account program in 2021. This was a program that was initially there was a pilot program developed that the city of St. Paul worked on. And so building off the best practices that they have learned from that program, this proposal is seeking to support local units of government who want to serve as custodians of a college savings account, and then further remove some of the identified barriers that the city of St. Paul and other local jurisdictions have identified to make this program more feasible. And next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. Next proposal is around New Americans Initiative. Our immigration staff have identified that there are oftentimes financial and administrative barriers that really make it difficult for permanent residents to acquire their citizenship. This would be a statewide legislative initiative really focused on promoting naturalization and then identifying and removing some of those barriers. So perhaps administrative rules that agencies have and or funding to help pay for the growing fees in citizenship filing in the state of Minnesota. Not next slide, sorry. Still on to this one. Next one is around, it has to do with immigration as well. And it deals with the gross misdemeanor 364 to 365. This idea is that reducing the maximum sentence of a gross misdemeanor criminal conviction in the state of Minnesota from 364 to 365 would not trigger certain kinds of immigration proceedings. The gross misdemeanor conviction certainly has an inequitable impact on non-U.S. citizens because it potentially triggers grounds for deportation. and eliminates the possibility of obtaining relief from removal. The next proposal is on a statewide conversion therapy ban. And I don't just essentially supporting a statewide legislative action to ban conversion therapy of minors. There was a bill that was moving on the House side last session, and there's still desire to continue working on this statewide conversion therapy ban. And so want to make this explicit on our policy position as well. Next slide, please. The next two proposals have to do with energy standards. The advanced building standards, particularly this proposal supports the work of the Minneapolis Climate Action Plan. And essentially an advanced building energy standard, it creates a path for the city to make new construction more energy efficient and ready to meet city and state greenhouse gas reduction goals. The next one is the energy conservation optimization policy. And these updates will provide opportunities for cost-effective energy efficiency and electrification measures. And it helps, the policy position seeks to modernize and expand Minnesota's conservation improvement programs administered by energy utilities. Next proposal is regarding
Ms. Moore, just one quick second. There is a couple of comments from Councilmember Cunningham and then Councilmember Schrader.
I already spoke. Thank you.
My apologies, Councilmember Schrader.
Sure. Just wanted to quickly comment on kind of the energy work. I really appreciate your team and how much they've been pushing this. One thing I know that in the last session, some of the bills focused on kind of the trade-off of being able to have a higher, maybe a less ambitious standard, but have it statewide over a bigger geography, as opposed to a much stricter standard or a much higher standard that we would want here in the city. And I know that that's going to be a balance to be worked out for the good of all of Minnesota, but I would really appreciate us thinking a little selfishly and thinking about how we can meet our clean energy goals and to make sure that we're able to be able to push as far as we can. Because right now we're very limited by the state building code. And I know that there's a willingness to be able to push beyond that.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Schrader and members. And you're absolutely right. Back to our Minneapolis delegation, I think we can celebrate the fact that we've got one of our delegation members who will be chairing the Energy Committee in the House as well. And so this is also the individual who carried one of the important energy bills last session as well. So there's a lot of opportunity for further engagement. And as those opportunities present themselves to have some of these one-to-one meetings, Councilmember Schrader, I'll be sure to make sure that you are pulled into those as well. And if there aren't any other questions, Council Vice President?
There isn't any at the moment, so please continue.
Thank you. I believe I was on the city employee geolocation proposal next. This is regarding the Data Practices Act. The Data Practices Act does not explicitly protect employee geolocation data. And further, a recent court ruling weakened the provisions that the city has used to protect that information, employees' information. Increasingly, the use of technology allows for tracking of geolocation, fleet services, and other technology assets. Similarly, time and place data that could allow tracking employee movement is gathered through some of the key cards and smart locks that are becoming a lot more prevalent. And so the idea is that we would seek to amend the Minnesota Data Privacy Act to classify employee geolocation data as private data. And the next one is regarding rehomed animals and their data as well. The Minneapolis Animal Care and Control has expressed concern that some data related to animal incidents, including some investigations, so either bites or maltreatment cases, and rehoming confiscated animals is not explicitly protected. The city has protected the identity of complainants under existing law. However, the identity of witnesses and the location and identity of rehome pets is generally not public unless specific circumstances apply. And so this position would seek to reclassify or to clarify and classify that rehome location of animals, the identity of the new owner and person assisting investigators. All that information would be private data. And the next slide, please. Next slide deals with the peace officer data complaint. And this is really related to the Police Accountability Act as well that was passed earlier in the summer. So the summer changes were proposed to the Data Practices Act regarding personnel data. Through the negotiations that took place, this particular provision was dropped from the draft. This is to further support efforts to amend that Data Privacy Act and make the complaint status of peace officers accessible to the public. So, for example, under current law, the city cannot clearly distinguish between complaint investigation outcomes, exonerated, things like if they did not pursue due to lack of evidence, investigation sustained, or even any incidences that resulted in coaching. All that information is not privy to the public. So this seeks to make some of that information public information. And moving on to virtual meetings conduct. The city is constrained in how and when it can allow virtual meetings for council, as well as appointed boards and commissions. And as we have seen, due to the COVID pandemic, we are seeing some increased participation in these kinds of meetings. So the idea of this position is to expand the Minnesota open meeting law to incorporate types of virtual meetings that are allowed at the state, and then extend, and then to that extent, expand the participation on the kinds of boards and commissions that the city oversees as well. And moving on to the oversized commercial truck parking. Oversized commercial delivery trucks typically park legally for extended periods of time on many streets throughout the city when they're not in use, and they do often pose safety and livability threats to residents, to other drivers, etc. A current work group that's researching the issue has discovered that there are limited alternatives for these trucks, and that there's a shortage of capacity and limited access to truck parking generally. This is not just in the city of Minneapolis, but this has actually been identified as a statewide issue as well. So this proposal would seek to identify a regional solution to the lack of designated commercial truck parking. And I think it'll be important to note that the work group that's working on this has also identified that there are a lot of BIPOC individuals who own these trucks. And so really ensuring that we utilize a lens of race equity when identifying like what solutions are equitable to ensure that these business owners are not adversely impacted by any kind of regional change as well, is something that we'll be really ensuring moving forward with this. And the next slide, please.
Hey, just 1 second, Ms. Moore. I do, as a member of that work group, I absolutely agree that this is a statewide issue that's going to require a regional approach. So I'm glad we're advocating for that. And I want to acknowledge Councilmember Cunningham, who has a question or comment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. As someone who's really been leading the work around the oversized vehicle parking regulations, trying to figure that out, I'm really excited to see this in there as we're moving forward, because as was stated, we've just hit such a roadblock, no pun intended, with being able to address this issue. It felt pretty straightforward. You know, it's like, all right, our streets are being used as parking lots. semi-truck parking lots, let's just say you can't do that, and then easy peasy, because other suburban jurisdictions have done that around us, really leaving Minneapolis as kind of like the last place where it was possible for folks to park their semi-trucks. And as we actually started digging into the work, talking to learning about the industry, learning about who actually is, who are the drivers, and it's more than just drivers. They actually are small business owners, and like that is their business as contractors and other things of the sort. And we wanted to be really intentional that we're not causing harm as we are looking at supporting more BIPOC small businesses, as we are looking to create real wealth building opportunities, that we want to make sure that we're not causing harm in the process. So this wasn't quite as easy or straightforward as we went into it, thinking it was going to be. Unfortunately, given the fact that we are the largest jurisdiction in the area, the smaller jurisdictions were able to make those bans of parking, and kind of leaving us to having to address this broader issue. And come to find out, we can't really do it because it's a statewide problem. And so this is something that we really need to lean into the state about, because it is really shocking how little parking space there is actually available throughout the entire state of Minnesota. But particularly here in the metro area, we just do not have a lot of places for people to park their semi-trucks. And that's very harmful for these small business owners. I mean, when we had the community meetings, the meetings were very stark in the demographics who showed up. And it was very, like, overwhelmingly, the folks who showed up were people of color and immigrants who drove these trucks and owned their own small businesses. So we really do need, I know it can kind of just be like, oh, it's semi-trucks, blah, like it's not a big urgent issue, but it actually is if we are thinking about it within the context of building wealth within BIPOC communities. And this is something that is absolutely falls within that purview. So we really need to lean into the state to do their job, to make sure that we have enough space for those businesses to thrive. Thanks.
Councilmember Cunningham and Chair Jenkins, thank you both for highlighting that. We absolutely agree, and we'll be putting pressure on the state to participate in this regional conversation and around solutions.
Yeah, so there are no other comments at this time. You can continue on with your presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next is domestic violence and assault modifications. I'm not muted. Okay, sorry, I thought it was muted. This proposal is to amend 2 Minnesota state statutes related to strangulation. The first is to enhance the penalty from a misdemeanor to a gross misdemeanor for knowingly or having reason to believe a family member or household whom the defendant strangled was pregnant. So it's to enhance that penalty. The second is to define what strangulation is, and that it is intentionally impeding normal breathing or circulation of the body by applying pressure on the neck, the throat or neck, or by blocking the nose or mouth of another person, or by impeding someone's ability to breathe by laying on top of them or placing pressure on their chest or neck without using their hands, and then to increase that penalty to a felony instead. We'll be working on this one as well. And then
Ms. Moore, we have another question from Councilmember Cunningham.
Sorry, this might be a little bit of the area where I've been doing quite a lot of work, so my apologies for speaking so much. But I just want to highlight this because research clearly demonstrates that strangulation is actually the #1 predictor for domestic homicide. So if you look at the folks who are killed by their partners, there's at least typically one incident of strangulation that has happened in the past. It is very important that we catch this early and that we hold folks accountable for causing harm in this way. It is the #1 predictor of domestic homicide. The fact that it's considered a misdemeanor is really shocking, given the fact that that evidence is so clear. So this should just be really easy and straightforward. And I would say more broadly that this is one part of it, but we also have to be pushing into the hospitals, the ERs, so that they are screening folks who are coming in with injuries, with maybe mysterious injuries, that they're screening for strangulation. That like we need to, there are actual assessments that exist for hospitals to implement in ERs, so that they're screening folks who, particularly women who are coming in with mysterious injuries. I mean, strangulation can lead to traumatic brain injury. There's all sorts of long-term consequences alongside being at a much higher risk of later experience being a victim of domestic homicide. This is a small but critical change that's needed to at least reflect the urgency of addressing this particular issue. I think more broadly, we have to be thinking about perpetrator interventions as well. We don't want to just criminalize folks without giving them a clear pathway of changing their behaviors. But this is a small change in our state laws that will reflect the seriousness of strangulation in regards to particularly with domestic violence. So I just really wanted to pause and highlight that, because there are very few things that we can like literally point at and say that's the #1 predictor of that. And if we have the ability to save lives through this as one step, then we need to take that. So thank you very, very much for including this. This is a critical change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Chair Jenkins, I definitely give credit to our city attorney's office, because they were the ones who identified this as a critical need as well. And then last but not least, it is the 5th degree assault modification. So this policy position seeks to amend a statute to make it a misdemeanor to intentionally throw or otherwise intentionally transfer bodily fluids or feces onto another person. And with that, final slide, please, which is essentially just to provide a summation of what the next steps are going to be. Again, I think in the past, city staff whose recommendations whose policy positions are recommended to move forward are the ones who would have presented these to the council. And it's important that they can't all be here, because I think they probably would have done a much better job of explaining the context than I did. But as far as the next steps go, we will be tracking, again, all legislative changes on our 2021 agenda. So you'll be able to see any other deletion or addition to the policy recommendations. In addition to that, as while we were putting together that 2021 agenda, I've had several conversations with some council members, and IGR will be putting together legislative briefing documents, one-pagers that will be utilized that highlight some of these top priorities, from public safety to housing and homelessness to even property taxes, because as we approach the 2021 session, while we have a surplus now, and just in the instance that there are any potential cuts that we may need to stave off, we want to make sure that we are arming our delegation members with really relevant information as well. So at the next council meeting, you will be able to track those changes on our ledge agenda. And in the interim, if there are any other recommendations or ideas that council members you all are thinking about, please let us know. And I have taken note of those who are interested in and the proposals that they are excited about, and we'll be reaching out for some of those one-to-one meetings with legislators.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Ms. Moore and Ms. Nessie, for that report, and to all of the staff who worked to pull this together and bring these policy recommendations to the fore. Ordinarily, we recognize the importance of this work, and we have in our normal committee structure, a committee dedicated to this work, which is chaired by Councilmember Johnson. And so I'm glad he put himself in queue, as I was going to offer him an opportunity to speak to this 2021 legislative agenda and policy position. So Councilmember Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, and also Vice Chair of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. I just really want to thank Director Moore and the whole IGR team for all their work on this. It really is such a massive effort, working with every department, working with our legislative delegation, working with outside partners to really bring forward these thoughtful recommendations that add to this body of work. I know it's no easy undertaking. It's one of these things where it's easy to look at IGR and just think, oh, they're really busy during the session. Maybe there's a downtime. There is no downtime for our IGR team, and they're just working with such a broad group to build consensus around this. Also, Metro Cities, League of Minnesota Cities, they're very engaged with, and tapped into those conversations as well, and helping advance policy work, not just through our legislative agenda, but through the legislative agendas of these other organizations as well. And that is felt and makes a difference in those legislative agendas, and ultimately moves policy, important policy forward at a state, federal level, and funding as well. And so just very thankful for all the team's work which is represented in all of this, and very much looking forward to continuing working together as we both pass in our upcoming council meeting the updates, and also as we work on a public safety agenda as well, and really get prepared for what is sure to be a very busy legislative session over at the Capitol as well. So thanks again, Director Moore and Allison and the whole rest of the IGR team and everyone involved in all of this great work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Johnson. And I don't see any other council members in queue. Again, thank you, Director Moore and your team for all of your efforts. And yes, I concur. It is going to be an exciting session over at the Capitol, which hasn't really ended yet. And so it'll start again in 2021 and continue on with the work that they are doing there. So thank you so much. And seeing no other discussion, I will ask the clerk to file that report. And that brings us to our last discussion item. Number 15 is a resolution stabilizing the arts and culture services in the city enterprise. And Ms. Gogun Kayam from the coordinator's office will be presenting on this item. Ms. Kayam.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Gulgun Kayam. I'm the Director of Arts, Culture and the Creative Economy in the City Coordinator's Office. I'm here to present on the resolution to stabilize arts and culture services in the city enterprise. And we are seeking your approval of this resolution, which is authored by Council Members Cano, Ellison, Reich, and Council Vice President Jenkins. Next slide, please. To give you some context and background on the decision before you, I will begin today's presentation with a summary of the staff directions issued to the Coordinator's Office in 2019 to reorganize the city arts and culture work. I will summarize the work that has already been done to date on these staff directions, and then I will review the main points of the proposed resolution before you. Next slide, please. First, I'll start with the brief background and timeline of the city's arts reorganization work. The reorganization of the city's arts work began in July 2019 through a council staff direction to the City Coordinator's Office. Council directed the City Coordinator to convene a work group with the task to review and assess the city's body of arts work for the purposes of better internal alignment and the acceleration of the city's arts and culture policy priorities, strategies, and racial equity goals. The work group findings and recommendations were presented to the Council in November 2019, and a second staff direction was then issued with the task to create a tactical plan for implementation of the approved recommendations. The final tactical plan was to be reviewed by Council by April 2020. Unfortunately, our work was paused in March due to the COVID pandemic and the need for city staff to attend to the health and economic emergencies that came as a result of the governor's order to shut down all non-essential businesses. But before our work was paused, we were able to present an update on our progress to city leadership in February 2020. Next slide, please. I'm going to provide some more detail about the Council staff direction, as these items are also in the resolution before you. So in July, when the Council issued the staff direction to the Coordinator's Office, the deliverables were an audit of the city's arts spend and a SWOT analysis. The task of the work group was to create a set of recommendations based on the combined findings and the data gathered in the audit and the SWOT analysis. Next slide, please. This slide shows at a very high level the audit, which is much more detailed. So this is a very high level representation of the city's body of arts work. The audit looked at the last 5 years of the city's arts spend and showed that the city spent in arts and culture is dispersed among 4 departments and in 8 program areas, with the highest single program spend coming from public art and the second highest from public works. This decentralization was seen as a weakness and a threat in our SWOT analysis. Next slide, please. This is another high-level version of the document that we created. From the internal audit, this SWOT analysis was developed by the work group. And then from this analysis, 4 areas of recommendation emerged, and these were presented to Council for approval in November 2019. Next slide, please. The number 1 recommendation addressed the organization of arts and cultural work within the city enterprise and recommended consolidating arts and cultural programs to create a new standalone department or division. The second recommendation focused on establishing a dedicated revenue stream for arts and cultural investment that comes from outside of the general fund. The third recommendation addressed Minneapolis neighborhoods and arts enterprise support. This recommendation provided support beyond the city's core downtown to attend to the needs of surrounding neighborhoods and those creative enterprises that anchor these parts of the city. And the fourth recommendation focused on more intentionally promoting and marketing the city's arts and culture sector through a partnership with Meet Minneapolis that included promoting the city as a premier arts and cultural destination. Next slide, please. The Council voted to approve these 4 recommendations, and in a second staff direction, ordered the work group to expand and continue to convene. The expansion would include members from finance, IGR, and the city attorney's office. Next, to also create a tactical plan that includes budget and timeline on how to implement the recommendation areas. And then finally, to present a final proposal for Council approval in the first quarter of 2020. Next slide, please. Progress on the work continued as planned, and then in the February update, it became evident that we needed to reprioritize our efforts and to focus on identifying the core and support services of this new centralized division, and then to define at a high level, its programming structure and funding sources. This was to be the focus of our April 2020 deliverable and what the work group was on course to deliver before the work was paused in March. Next slide. Before pausing our work, however, we did make significant progress to identify the core and support services of this new centralized division, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the work we did. Next slide, please. This is just a summary, a high-level summary of the work completed to date. We identified core and support services of this new division. We compiled research on exemplar and peer cities. We identified peer city ordinances on arts departments and their funding streams. We compiled research on economic support for neighborhood arts and culture festivals. And after the initial pause, we also made some adjustments to the SWOT analysis once it became clear that the COVID-19 pandemic would last beyond March and would have significant impacts on Minneapolis's creative economy. Next slide. I'll now walk through the main points of the proposed resolution before you. Next slide, please. First, the purpose of the resolution is to stabilize the arts and culture services within the city enterprise so as to increase and consolidate the visibility and effectiveness of these services. This is especially important during times of budgetary constraint, as the action to consolidate supports city priorities, supports the creative sector, and improves enterprise efficiency and operations. Next slide, please. The resolution supports the city priorities listed here. This list of priorities reference city goals related to the arts and culture sector, city policies whose successful implementation involve arts and culture strategies, and recent council resolutions responding to current community emergencies, and where the skills and resources of artists and arts and culture organizations are already playing a significant role in supporting the city's racial equity goals and recovery plans. Next slide, please. The resolution supports individual artists and arts and culture organizations and enterprises and those communities that seek out the resources of the creative sector in times of crisis. While the livelihood of artists and creative workers have been severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, these individuals and organizations have also been at the forefront of supporting community needs. It is more important than ever that the city recognizes and works with community resources to support urgent community needs, and the arts and artists are important community resources. They are not only providing benefits through the creative economy, but also in their ability to mobilize their skills and talents to support community needs. Artists and the arts and cultural activities have been providing urgently needed avenues of communication, trauma processing, and relief to BIPOC and non-BIPOC communities who continue to be traumatized by the killing of an unarmed Black man and the COVID-19 pandemic. They also provide communities and neighborhoods effective methods for healing, community engagement, community support, recovery, and communication with government. These creative resources are currently being mobilized through the work of my office and the Public Art Program in CPED. These strategies can also be more effectively leveraged by the city as a resource in emergency response and mitigation. Next slide, please. The resolution supports consolidation in an effort to reduce duplication and redundancies in enterprise services, while also increasing the effective implementation of city policies. Consolidating arts and culture services within the city enterprise is the first step in the broader effort to better centralize and coordinate the city's arts and culture investments, especially during a period of increased demand. Consolidating arts and culture work allows the city to respond more effectively and efficiently to community needs, especially in times of crisis. It allows the city to better consolidate and support the needs of the creative economy, and it also allows clearer visibility and increases the legibility of the city's arts and culture services. Finally, consolidating our services allows the city to more effectively mobilize the skills and resources that are within the creative sector to support other city racial equity priorities around public safety, community healing, and recovery. Next slide, please. Stabilizing the execution and delivery of arts and culture services begins by transitioning 2 FTEs in arts and culture and the creative economy, currently in grant-funded positions, onto the general fund. These positions are set to expire in September 2021. The resolution also supports the city's operational goal of the retention of people of colour and Indigenous people in the city's workforce. The 2 FTEs in arts and culture and the creative economy are people of colour and provide important equity work for and within communities of colour. These 2 FTEs manage equity-related programming that directly serves underserved and underrepresented communities. Finally, the resolution seeks to consolidate arts and culture work in a timed and phased approach, taking into account current and future budgetary constraints. This means extending the delivery date of the existing staff direction into the first quarter of 2021, and then delivering additional phases throughout 2022. Next slide, please. Thank you, Madam Chair, Council members. I hope this provides you with the information you need in order to approve the resolution before you. I'm happy to stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Kayam, for that really detailed overview of a very extensive process that myself and Council members Ellison and Reich and Kano have been working with you and your team in the coordinator's office to come up with this this work product. And I will entertain questions from my colleagues. However, I do want to note that we're being pressed for time. There is another committee that needs to meet at 4 p.m. We still have a little ways to go on our agenda, but if there are any questions or comments, please, please direct them to Ms. Kayam or myself or any of the council members involved in this resolution. Seeing none, I will move this item for approval. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will now ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osman.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and that motion is approved. The committee's recommendation will be forwarded to the Friday City Council meeting for final action. And there is a comment from Council Member Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we're working to wrap up here. I should have mentioned this earlier. You know, obviously this does include a budget related item, which I assume council members are working on separately to bring through the budget process, similar to how we took a policy approach to Neighborhoods 2020, but those actions still need to be carried through the budget. So this action alone did not just amend the budget to transition those staff to the general fund, is my understanding, and that we would likely be seeing a budget amendment for that. Maybe that's a question, and I can follow up as well.
I think you are correct, and maybe we can ask the budget chair or Mr. Intermill if he's available. Councilmember Palmisano, do you have a response to that? But I do believe you are correct, Councilmember Bender.
Yeah, I agree with you, Council Vice President, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I just put in the chat the resolving clause I was referring to, which references transitioning the grant funded staff to the general fund. That would require an amendment to our budget.
Yes.
Madam Chair, may I attempt to answer that question?
Yes, please.
My understanding is that there is a budget amendment that will come before you during markup, whereby the funding sources will be identified. We were unable to provide them for this presentation because council members were working on identifying those resources. So that will be up for your consideration in the markup. Does that
That's great. That makes sense. And maybe I'll just follow up because I know we're pressed for time, just about, if that kind of budget commitment really belongs in a resolution that is intended to sort of be in perpetuity, referencing a budget decision that will, be made through the budget process. So anyway, I'm happy to follow up. I don't want to belabor this because I know there's a lot of support for this work. So, but just needing to make sure that the follow-up around the budget is happening. It sounds like it is.
Correct, it is, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember Bender. And so now we will move to, and thank you, Ms. Kayam and all of the other council members and staff who have been involved in this very lengthy and detailed process to bring this work forward. And there's still quite a bit of work to do in 2021, but we continue to move forward. And so now we will move to our standing committee reports, and please let's be succinct so that we can allow time to reset for the next meeting after this one. And we'll start with the Budget Committee report given by Chair Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On November 16th, our Budget Committee held the first hearing on our city's proposed 2021 budget. There were 167 speakers signed up for the hearing. There were 100 speakers that actually spoke at the hearing. And it was both about the budget, the tax levy, the consolidated plan, and the proposed water and sewer rates. We will have the second hearing as part of this process tonight. That's all we've got.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, the next committee report is the Business Inspection, Housing and Zoning Committee given by Chair Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Business Inspection, Housing and Zoning Committee is bringing forward 23 items for approval. Item number 1 is a bond issuance. 2 is a liquor license. 3 is a interim use permit shelter in Northeast Minneapolis. Item 4 is a notable item. This is an ordinance amending our codes related to short-term rentals. Item number 5 is the tax increment financing plan for West Broadway Curve. Item 6 is an appeal of a certificate of appropriateness, and we granted the appeal, and the adopted findings are also below. Item number 8 is the gambling license approvals. 7, I'm sorry, is the liquor license approvals. 9 is a rental dwelling license. 10 is a bid for plumbing services. 11 is the carry forward of our 2020 tax exempt housing revenue bonds. Item 12 is an affordable housing loan with people serving people. Item 13 is extending the exclusive development rights for Snelling Yards. Item 14 is a contract amendment for management services at the Upper Harbor. Item 15 is an agreement with the Met Council with regard to a bus shelter on West Broadway. Item 16 is the ESG capital funding recommendations. Item 17 is an appropriation for our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This is a one-time appropriation of CDBG money. Item 18 is approving the adequacy of the EAW for a project at 21 North Washington Avenue in the 3rd Ward. Item 19 is a rezoning on behalf of Norway House. Item 20 is passing the ordinance with regard to exterior security barriers. Item 21 is a contract amendment with MPHA with regard to stable homes, stable schools. Item 22 is the adopting a resolution with regard to the community-led process for cultural and economic recovery at Minnehaha and East Lake Street. And item number 23 is the sustainability policy for 1 to 3 unit new construction residential projects through the Minneapolis Homes Program. With that, I'm happy to answer questions on items 1 through 23.
Thank you so much, Chair Goodman. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? I'm happy to see the security doors moving forward on this agenda, and a number of other items that you mentioned are very timely. So we will move now to our next report, which is the Public Health and Safety Committee, given by Councilmember Cunningham, the chair of that committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Public Health and Safety Committee is bringing forward 5 items for approval on Friday. The first is approving the appointment by the Executive Committee of Brian Tyner to the appointed position of Fire Chief for a 2-year term. The second is authorizing the submittal of a grant application to the Minnesota Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management in the amount of $15,000 for a 1-year period. Item number 3 is authorizing the submittal of a grant application to the Minnesota Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management in the amount of $829,500 over an 18-year period. Item number 4 is authorizing the submittal of a grant application to the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for $30,000. All of those are related to the Office of Emergency Management being able to forward their work around prevention, preparation, mitigation, response, and recovery. The last item for that will be moved for approval is authorizing master contracts with the eligible providers list of community nonprofit agencies with the health department. That list can be found on the LIMS system. So we will have those 5 items. And I also will note that we had 2 robust presentations. The first was from MPD and the Office of Violence Prevention related to crime statistics, as well as getting down into the details at the precinct level of what responses are happening both through MPD and the Office of Violence Prevention, as well as we had a special guest presenter from Cure Violence International come and talk about the violence interrupters work. So I recommend for folks to check out those presentations to be able to get more details on those 2 items. So I'm happy to answer any questions on the 5 items that will be brought forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Are there any questions? Any questions? Seeing none, our next committee report is the Transportation and Public Works Committee, given by Chair Reich.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The committee had 10 items. Item 1 was the Johnson Street reconstruction project. Item 2 regarded Grand Avenue South reconstruction project. 4 was an agreement with Metro Transit for the Hennepin County D-Line Bus Rapid Transit project. Item 6 was a temporary easement with a rail company for our work at that location. Item number 7 was a grant application for MnDOT for the Clean Transportation Pilot Program. 8 was the capital project closeouts. Those were listed. 9 was a bid for concrete sidewalk curb and driveway approaches project. And item 10 was a big item. That was the approval of the draft Minneapolis Transportation Action Plan, a big document with a lot of impact for the subsequent decade around our policies. I'll also note we did recognize Director of Water Treatment and Distribution, Glenn Garretts, for his outstanding service to the city of Minneapolis as he prepares for his retirement. I will stand for questions, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Wright. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none, we have concluded all the business to come before this committee today. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.